Welcome. This is the second lesson recording for week 5 of distance learning in IM2. So we are going to delve into solving absolute value equation. We know how to solve one variable equations and two variable equations. And now we're going to go into absolute value equations. So before we get into that, we're going to quickly review or recall what we know already. So if you actually look back to your notes in the beginning of the year, we actually started talking about absolute value functions already there, okay? And we talked about that absolute value function gives numerical value of a number without its sign, and it represents the distance on a number line from 0. So for example, absolute value of -4, because the distance away from 0 is 4, and absolute value of 5, positive 5, the distance away from 0 is 5, we say that absolute value of 5 is 5. So we're really talking about the distance. And we use this symbol, absolute value symbol, and the answer is always positive. It's also a grouping symbol, so you need to evaluate inside the absolute value function first. That's what we did, and then we did some exercises on that. Okay, so I want you to look back to your notes and see if you can find it at this point and make sure you understand. So let's go back to taking notes. Just quickly, let's write down what is important. So absolute value of a number is the distance that the number is away from 0. So you should be taking notes at this point. So, for example, absolute value of 4 is 4. Why? Because 4 is 4 units away from 0. And absolute value of -4 is also 4, because -4 is also 4 units away from 0. So it looks like two different numbers, 4 and -4, two seemingly different numbers give the same answer when it's evaluated. Okay? It almost seems like the absolute value function strips. So absolute value function strips the negative sign if it has it. If it's positive number, then it does nothing. Nothing is changed. But if it's a negative number, it's almost as if it's stripping that negative sign. So if you can think back to the function machine, remember the function machine, there's an input going in, and we put the x in. The x goes in here, and then f of x comes out here. Okay, or the value after whatever the function machine does. So in this case, if f of x is the absolute value of x, you're taking this function, it basically, whatever the number is, it strips away what the absolute value function is. It strips away the negative sign. If it's positive sign, it just doesn't do anything to it. But if it's a negative number, then it strips away the negative sign. So like if I have -3 coming in, okay, it almost looks like, oh, okay, it's going in here, but I'm just gonna we just don't have room for this negative sign, and out pops out the 3, and it just swallows up the negative sign. That's what this absolute value function does. So I'm going to write that down. Absolute value function strips the negative sign So I'm going to strips if the number is negative. It does nothing. Or no change. If number if the number is positive. So if the number is negative, it strips away that negative sign. But if the number is positive, basically it does nothing, or there is no change after you apply the absolute value function. Okay, so then let's do some practice problem, and this is very similar to what you have already done. So I am going to display it for now, and I am going to ask you to pause the video, copy these down, copy all of these down, and then we will go through them together. So please copy this down now, and I am going to go through the answers together. You should try the problems yourself, okay? All right, the answers are shown in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, what's absolute value of 15? It's just 15. Because it's positive, it does nothing. What about negative 38? Oh, it has negative sign. It doesn't like that. It just pops out the positive value of it. What about 21.5? Well, it's the same thing with the decimals. Okay, so it's positive, so nothing's changed. So it's going to be 21.5. What about negative 7/8? Well, it's a negative number. So the only change the absolute value function does is it makes it into a positive 7/8, and so on. Oh, number 5 is a little bit interesting. What is absolute value of 10? Okay, once we apply the absolute value function, okay, so that means once you go through that function machine, what pops out is positive 10 after the machine. And then after it pops out, then you apply negative to it. So what is absolute value of 10? It's just 10. And then after that, you apply the negative sign. So the answer here is. And what about absolute value of negative 6? And then there is a negative sign afterwards. What's the absolute value of negative 6? It's 6. Then you apply the negative sign. Then you get negative 6. Okay? All right, then what about number 7? Okay, what's absolute value of negative 9? Remember, you're basically, to get rid of the absolute value sign, you're just applying that principle. We just need to strip away any negative sign. So this, if to try to get rid of the absolute value function, you're just applying the absolute value function, and then out pops out 9. So this just becomes 9 minus, what's the absolute value of 6? Is again 6. So it's 9 minus 6. So which is what? 3. Okay. In this case, what is absolute value of 15? That's just 15 plus, what's the absolute value of 8? It's 8. So that's 23. So it's pretty simple. Okay. Remember, the applying absolute value function is basically taking away its negative if it's negative, and if it's positive, it does nothing. So this just becomes positive 8 times positive 5, which is going to be 8 times 5 is 40. What about this? Absolute. Now, in this case, we have the numbers inside the parentheses. That means it's sort of like there is a parenthesis, or inside the absolute value. It's almost like there is a parenthesis in here. So you need to apply this first. So what's negative 2 plus 7? What's negative 2 plus 7? Oh, it's positive 5. Positive 5, and then apply the absolute value function. Okay, and then apply the absolute value function. Positive 5, absolute value of positive 5 is just still positive 5. What about this? 7 minus 15? 7 minus 15, we need to evaluate inside the absolute value function first. Why? Because this is a grouping symbol. So we need to evaluate first. 7 minus 15 is negative 8. So it's negative 8, absolute value of negative 8. And from here, apply the absolute value function, and then the out pops out positive 8. Okay, here we have a number outside the absolute value, and there is my absolute value function here. Okay, so that means I need to evaluate this first. What's negative 5 minus 10? What's negative 5 minus 10? It's negative 15. So now we have 12 plus absolute value of negative 15. And then from here, what's 12? We can't do anything about 12. But we want to get rid of this absolute value function. Once we do that, it pops out positive 15. So the answer is 12 plus 15, which is 27. Okay, and then last two. Okay, negative 9. Absolute value of negative 9 is positive 9 divided by 3. What's 9 divided by 3? That's just 3. What about this? Negative 7 times negative 3, and then apply absolute value divided by 5. Okay, so make sure you do the order properly. We need to evaluate what's inside the absolute value function first. So that's negative 7 times negative 3. That's positive 21. You can't start taking the negative sign away inside. Okay, you do that after you've evaluated it and then apply the absolute value function like so. Absolute value function of 21 is just 21 over 5. Okay, and I'm going to leave it as an improper fraction for now. Okay, so I hope you are now thoroughly convinced what you need to do when you have a number inside the absolute value function. Okay, let's now extend this a little bit and see what happens when you have a variable inside the absolute value function. So if you have the problem that says solve for x and absolute value of x is equal to 7. Now, what is it really asking? Okay, so when it says solve, what is it really asking? We're looking for, what does this word solve mean? We're looking for values of x that makes that equation true. So we are looking for values, it can be more than one, of x that makes that equation true. That's what solve means. Okay, so we're looking for the value of x. Now, then comes the question, what values of x makes the absolute value of x? So then it comes the question, what values of x would make absolute value of x be equal to 7? Okay, now we have this question. Now, can you think of some numbers that will make for x that will make, once you apply it, that's going to come out as 7? Well, since absolute value of 7 is 7 and absolute value of negative 7 is also 7, we have two different solutions. So x can be positive 7 or negative 7. So we suddenly have two different answers or solutions. So we have two different answers when it comes to the absolute value function equation, I should say. Remember, if you had when you see just one variable equation, you could only have one solution, zero solution, or infinitely many solutions. We never could have two solutions. Okay, so this time I want you to try for yourself. So I am going to give you, so you try. What is, if I have absolute value of x is 3, or absolute value of x is negative 2. Okay, what do you think? I want you to pause the video and try this, and I am going to continue this in the next video.